No, it's not. Fuck.
Probably not wise for me to talk about Chinese spy balloons.
Ah, well, we might as well start at the start. I mean, who isn't? I mean, I just recorded a podcast, and I started off by saying that I heard people bursting balloons outside in the street last night, but it turned out to be a hen party from Wales celebrating a wedding. So, I mean, maybe there's some confusion there. I don't know. They could have been trying to, maybe it was from Wales or something, trying to spy on Irish agricultural methods or something.
I feel like hen party from Wales is one of the most depressing sentences anyone could ever say to me.
Listen, I remember trying to go, I remember playing in either Cardiff or Wrexham in 2002 with Rotting Christ to about 30 or 40 people and trying to go out afterwards for a drink. And when we're queuing to go into this pub, the bouncer punched the dude in front of us and knocked all his fucking teeth out straight onto the dude from Sakis and Rotting Christ's jacket. And we were just like, ah. And we just went, you know what? We'll just go back to the bus and get out of the city. But
Yeah,
Cardiff on a Saturday night for you, you know, glamour.
I lived in Cardiff. I know. It's
Did
weird.
you? Fucking
Yeah.
hell! Live to tell the tale.
I mean, I was very small, so it doesn't really count, but I did live there.
Right.
Um, I do try to flex that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a similarity between. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a similarity anymore, but there certainly used to be a similarity between, a Dublin, a Belfast, a Birmingham, a Glasgow, a Cardiff, or whatever. But I have a feeling sort of Dublin used to have that rough and ready kind of street hassle type thing about it, but it's long since gentrified, and all the people who wanted to kick your head in have been pushed to the burbs, you know. So I have a feeling Cardiff on a Saturday night is probably still a bit more is more hairy than Dublin is these days. But I suppose Glasgow or whatever, that's a process
Yeah.
of gentrification for you.
It's fucking terrifying. You see it happen building by building here in Brooklyn.
That's where you are now, is it?
That's where I am right now, yes.
Yeah.
Uh I remember living in like the last punk house in my neighborhood and watching the nice buildings come closer and closer every couple months and
Yeah.
just being like, we aren't going to be living in a squat much longer, are we?
Well,
Shit.
I mean, that's the thing is that, I mean, I mean, the last person I spoke to was John Cobbett from Hammers of Misfortune. And I think I met him in San Francisco 10 or 12, 14 years ago. And I think, I can't remember exact details, but we called up to Scalzi from Slough for a few beers beforehand. And it was in the kind of arty district. And even then he was going like, we're the last of the people hanging on here. And then, what he was telling me about San Francisco is the same thing I see in almost every big city that I go to now, whether it's Melbourne or Berlin or whatever, is that slowly but surely artists and people can't live in the city anymore, and there's no places for it. I mean, I live on a street where, parallel to this used to be a street of sort of odd, cool bars, and you could go see a band on a Saturday night or something like this. And let's just say it now, and people are probably on the podcast are bored of me saying this, but you can go to slam poetry on a Saturday morning and then hot yoga easier than you can go and see a band on a Saturday night. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, is slam poetry even like real?
Okay. I mean, there were words I could have prefaced slam poetry with to delineate its political orientation that I won't for the purposes of the podcast. But I think what it is that, I mean, people suck. No, I mean, what it is that, isn't it? It's just unfortunately kind of market forces in the sense that when there's no provision made to protect some of these areas, the fact is, like, I mean, I say this to my friends. Some people say to me, "Oh, why don't you open a bar in Dublin?" And I think to myself, you could have something cool here, but I don't know if people would go anymore. So I don't think that's what they want. You know?
Well, yeah, because ultimately the problem with our society, right? Like the thing that like nobody wants to acknowledge, but I think is like the larger problem with culture
Mm.
is that culture that you have to experience in person, like
Yeah.
live music, like a bar, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that video games are just more entertaining, right? And it's like I always use the joke of like your band has to be more entertaining than an evening of watching my favorite show at home with the cat. You know, because I know that's like a solid evening and I don't want to go see your band in a shitty venue and be cold and grouchy and have you put on a boring show. Right.
Yeah.
But it's true,
Yeah.
you know. Except now you're no longer competing with fucking Seinfeld and fucking, you know, Felix over here. You're competing with like the most intense, perfectly created video game for that specific person in like a VR or whatever. So of
Yeah.
course it's harder to get them to go to a show because the like when you look at like Discharge used to do like 30-day tours of the UK.
Mm.
And there like wasn't fucking anything to do in fucking
1980.
Sheffield on a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
You know, and there's still nothing to do in Sheffield on a Tuesday night because of the shithole.
Yeah.
But like moreover, they can play video games now. You know what I mean? And like I don't fucking know.
Well,
That's not
I mean,
good.
that's the process what we're moving into, isn't it? Really, that fundamentally you're talking about people having the sort of Oculus Rift sensation on a Saturday night. If they're moving into a sort of remote living, working lifestyle, then fundamentally, if they get sort of used to that, I think used to that situation, that the likelihood of them going out to socialize, I think people sort of lose the habit. You know, things can become severed. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
certainly,
absolutely.
certainly, it's one of the reasons why we know that in Germany, you know, a lot of people are not buying tickets for shows anymore, and I think that you can see it in stages. Like I was only saying this yesterday, is that the ability people once had to cancel on meeting up socially. You know, if you let's say we arranged to meet each other in 1993, unless I could get you on the fucking phone before you left the house, you were on your way into the place, and I had to go, or else I was like, "Fuck, he's going to be sitting there on his own all night and wondering what the fuck are you doing, you dickhead." And you were under
Yeah.
an obligation to meet your commitment, but now you can just go.
That's an interesting point.
You go, nah, feel sick, and there's no comeback. There's no you, and then somebody else goes, oh, okay, you know. And so now what you do is we have so many arrangements to avoid social commitment, so many, you know, kind of like
Sure.
easy ways out.
Sure.
And now post pandemic, a lot of people are going, you know what, maybe I didn't like being in a room with 100 people in a squashed in and sweaty room, or maybe I just like sitting on the couch, as you say, playing video games and drinking wine.
Yeah. And you know, I also can't fault them.
Well, you
You
can.
know, I mean, you can, but like, I guess what I'm saying is like, I understand like that desire, you know, um, and it's hard, you know, but it's been this way. I think it's just a continuation on the way it's been for years. Like for years, it was like, you know, for years it's been if you're, for example, playing a show in a place in a venue where most people walk to that venue
Mm,
and it starts raining, you were kind of fucked in 1995 or last week.
yeah.
You
Um,
know, I just think, but you're right that this is it. It's like if you have more excuses, if you have more entertainment, then the fuck.
yeah, I mean, I suppose it's just that the ability now to sort of embrace a kind of non-committal thing is just so much easier for everybody.
Absolutely,
Um, but
absolutely.
but I don't know where it. I mean, we both do bits of work in Germany and stuff. I don't know where it goes, especially when it comes to ticket buying and shows and that kind of thing, because nobody can calibrate anymore. And you know, a local agent or a festival can calibrate things the way they used to, because there's a big hesitancy amongst people now to buy tickets. Although the Catatonia Solstice tour, Adi told me, is killing it apparently, but you know, maybe that's the exception.
I mean, I think that people are more selective, right?
Mm,
And I also think that like what I'm seeing, especially in sort of the hardcore scene, which is kind of in America inherently the scene that young people are in, right?
really?
If they like heavy music. Yeah,
What do,
nobody.
what do you mean by hardcore?
Well, hardcore is a very broad definition. You know, I
Yeah.
managed to span a Squala grind. They're, if you listen to them in a vacuum, they are a death metal band, but they definitely identify with the hardcore scene as such.
Mm,
But in terms of like, how about this? The extreme music that is popular among people under the age of 30 in America,
sure. Okay. Yeah.
right? The extreme guitar music,
Mm.
like those crowds are better than ever.
Yeah.
You
That.
know, because I feel like that scene went away and now it's coming back. And I think that when you're creating a product people are excited about, you're creating a product people are excited about.
It's well, that's exactly what I mean. I did this with Paul from Blood Incantation, and that's exactly what he said. And he happens to be in one of those bands by hook or by crook who do bring out
Yes.
people. And there's a sort of I can see similarities whether it's with Full of Hell or Power Trip, before the guy sadly fucking died or whatever. They to me, like when I heard Power Trip, I was like, okay, I heard these riffs in 1990, 89. In fact, I have Ludacris Power Trip. I guess that's where they got the fucking name. Um, and I heard those crossover riffs, but now they're exciting to they were exciting to dudes who were like 20, 22, 23. And it's you can see a sort of sense of reimagination of some of those older scenes, but there's bands who are kind of stranded in some other place where they only play to 45 to 60-year-old people, you know. Um, I'm not sure. There doesn't seem to be a hell of a lot of rhyme or reason as to why one thing is one and one thing is the other. I mean, is it because Blood Get Incantation all wear white t-shirts? I don't know. Is it that simple?
I mean, I think it's Blood Incantation are an interesting one because they're not, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're not super young people, right?
No. Well, I mean, they're say late 30s, you know.
Yeah, so they're not, so it's not like some of these other bands where it's like 200 stab wounds, like
You're right.
R23.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's easy to understand why they have a bunch of 23-year-old friends that turns into a community that turns into,
Sure. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, um,
But for
you know,
example,
I
where Blood Incantation, the Paul was saying, they'll be on tour in the States and they could headline and pull 200, 300 people. But if you go
sure.
back to 2006 or 5 or 4, I remember talking to like Malevolent Creation guys, Immolation, this kind of stuff. And they were like, there's no point touring the USA right now. There's 25, 30, 40 people showing up. Also now a band who realistically are smaller than those bands were in their peak in the 90s is able to pull 2, 3, 400 people, you know.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
A couple things.
Okay.
I think that one, I think a lot of it is the narrative around the band, right? Because you'll see this happen where like you have Blood Incantation who are late 30s, you know, and then another band who are the same age, but who like Blood Incantation have also, by whatever way, been able to kind of have that narrative be young, exciting new death metal band pulling in elements of Yes into their Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right. And I think that when you can tell that story, right, the problem with a band like Immolation, like what I see with the kids who go to a 200 stab wound show or an Escuela grind show, you know, is those kids might sort of nominally know who Morbid Angel is, but they're not like Morbid Angel fans.
Yeah.
You know, for them, extreme music starts with like Black Dahlia Murder.
Sure. Okay.
You know what I mean? Which, you know, and you see that in other scenes, obviously, right? Like you see in the, you know, I would venture that many, I don't know, like in the thrash scene, once you got past like 1986, like a lot of those kids weren't listening to Iron Maiden. They were into like music started at Metallica for those kids. You know what I mean? Kind of the same thing with black metal, right? Like there's a group of people where music starts at not even necessarily at Mayhem. Like there's a whole new wave of black metal where I know people where music starts at Alcest.
Yeah.
You know,
I wonder, is it because everything is so stratified, everything is so atomized between all the different names of scenes that people are less inclined to go back to the beginning, because going back to the beginning means going back 30, 40, 50 years. And when I got into thrash, whatever, 86, 87, 83 seemed like fucking years away.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
But it was only 4 years. But I wanted to hear everything of where everything came from. Whereas
absolutely,
if you're getting into whatever is the cool kid black metal band now, I don't know what that is. Are you is you know, do you listen to me when I go, it's fucking nothing compared to Don't Break the Oath, and you go, pfft. But or I wanted to hear the equivalent of whatever that was, but I didn't have so far back to reach, I guess. Maybe it's because everything is so atomized. But that's society in general, I suppose.
Well, yeah. Well, and I think that like ultimately when you look at, to use a cool kid black metal band, who I very much enjoy, Black Braid, right? Who are like very hyped right now,
Black
very
Black
interesting stuff.
Braid.
Yeah,
Okay.
like genuinely good. None of this American pretending it's black metal wouldn't actually be allowed into Beyond the Gates shit. Um,
Okay. I know what you mean.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, I have a
Yeah.
lot of very elitist opinions, and I have a very elitist black metal girlfriend. So this
Mm,
is what I talk about all day.
mm.
But like, what I'm saying is like, when you look at a band like that, like, I think that so if you're someone who gets into Black Braid, like the amount of black metal that's been released in the last 5 years,
Mm.
there's enough to last you forever.
Yeah. I mean,
Ultimately, right? Like, I don't know, because when you start getting into thrash metal, there's in 1986, there's literally like 30 thrash metal records, maybe.
oh, I don't know, but no, I don't. I would disagree. There's hundreds and hundreds if you scratch the surface, but there's so many bands that you will, if you found like
I'm saying, sorry, to define, I mean an LP that was
yeah,
released like in a
yeah.
way that you could reasonably buy, not a tape, not like a tape.
Oh no, I don't for sure. I mean, for every creator in Sodom, there's you go down the levels, you go Exhumer, Living Death, Necronomicon, Protector, and before you get to,
Sure.
and you will get to, like if you, I'm not sure they exist anymore, but every now and again I go into a flea market or a secondhand store somewhere in, let's say, small town in Germany, and you might find, and you go, oh wow, okay, and you've got this nest egg of 40 to 50 to 60 Belgian, Dutch, German thrash from 1984, 85. There's more than you'd imagine, but I know what you mean. But there is more.
Yeah, like
Right.
what I'm saying is like there's always like more if you dig deeper, but broadly speaking, like if I am someone who can go to the record store and doesn't know someone in the scene,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I
you're a
mean, I,
little
I remember the day. I remember the day Mental Funeral came out. It was the same day as Blessed Are the Sick in Dublin, and there were queues of people to buy the two records, and that was your choice of that week.
yeah, that's what I'm
If you
saying.
had the money, which one would you buy? And they were the big records of that week or that month. Whereas, I mean, I pick up an issue of Death Forever, and I don't even want to look at Legacy anymore. And there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of records every month, and
Yeah.
I couldn't even imagine keeping up anymore.
Yeah.
What's
And
the
that's kind of my point.
yeah, yeah.
Um so all that to say, I think that when you're dealing with that oversaturation, I think it becomes more a question of like cutting through the noise, and it's a question of
Okay, then how do you cut through the noise?
same way it's always been, building community,
But
you
okay,
know?
but the difference is in, yeah, but they're different. There's a difference between, I suppose, what would have been an '80s analog community and then now trying to build a digital community. I mean, how does a band like pick if you pick one of those new bands? I mean, are they doing this through social media presence or different platforms, or like how is 200 Stab Wounds moving up through the ranks?
I mean, I
Do they
feel
play the game
like
properly or what?
I mean, let me use the Escuela Grind example just because they're at kind of a similar level and I actually manage them so I can
Okay,
speak more authoritatively. Um, I feel like there is a piece of the digital thing, and like that's definitely a band where like people make really dumb memes about them and it gets shared, and that really helps.
right. Okay.
Because I think that there is this piece of like that classic marketing thing of like people need to see something um 7 times before they act on it.
Mm,
You know what I mean? And that's obviously a piece. That being said, I also think that when you look at these bands, a big way a lot of them grew was just they were the really active guy in their scene.
Right.
Escuela, like Jesse, who's sort of the there's is one of the main ones in the band, right? Was in another band before that, has been booking DIY shows on their own for years, et cetera, et cetera. Was letting bands sleep at their house, was letting them all the classic things. You know what I mean? And I feel like the digital thing is almost an add-on, because I think that what I consistently see is that when people do, a lot of people think they can do it only digitally, but I think that people in most cases need to meet you to or need to have some sort of physical interaction, be that seeing you at a show or something, to kind of take that relationship to a next level, because I see a lot of people trying to, make memes about themselves, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
If there's no genuine product to back it up, but beyond there's an album out, I guess you could probably listen to it if you wanted to. You know what I mean? And I think that these people were all building community. Jesse in particular, I really admire, because they're always like in the DMs of every single band they think is cool, talking to them. But like, I don't really understand how fundamentally different that is from like tape trading and just being the really enthusiastic tape trader.
I mean, I think a
Like
lot.
it's harder to be a tape trader, but like fundamentally, there's not much difference between that and Brian Slagle writing letters to a ton of people in 1982.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's that the difference is that it's virgin territory. Then I think, I suppose a lot of it comes down to if you are able to go on tour properly and still press the flesh like bands traditionally do. And I think that the younger bands who are able to get that going, I always think 27 or 28 is a really complicated age. If you've been doing it since you're 18, 19, you have a little run before life's responsibilities catch up on you. And by the
Yes.
time you get to 28, you realize you never make any money from touring and you have to make a decision. Do you let life decide other things for you? So I see an awful lot of bands who build up a thing and then they run out of steam when they hit 27, 28, 29, because they just can't tour and not be paid anymore unless you're very, very lucky. Or you're 50 plus and your life's responsibilities have worked out and your kids are grown up and you can go back out on tour. And if that stage you can, then you're probably a legacy band who can get paid properly. But an awful lot of bands who pop up, then you look for them 3 or 4 years later and you go, oh, okay, this band just disappeared. I guess they just hit that 30 mark.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like that. You've got to decide if you're going to be a lifer or not.
Well, I mean, I think that, I mean, it's one of the things I used to often get frustrated with, dealing with the generation who were 1 or 2 older than me, was the idea that in 1983, you had such a stretch of upward mobility and you could be influenced by bands and see how they were growing, selling 50, 100, 150, 200,000 records, up and up and up. And it was kind of like opening out in front of you. And that was happened through the 90s and the 2000s, that you could still see a business, an open business model. But the aperture became slowly smaller and smaller and smaller. And now it's at the place where most bands, even who you would look on Spotify and see have hundreds of thousands of people following them, they're touring literally just for merch because the costs of doing it are so high. And so the idea that modern bands don't want to do what bands did in 83, I think is patently nonsense. I think it's more,
I agree.
It's more because you just keeping on doing it and just never making anything. I mean, it's sadly one of the reasons why Primordial never toured America enough, because everyone said to me, it's going to take 7 or 8 tours to get paid properly. And when everybody has jobs and kids and responsibilities and blah, 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 whatever, you're going to choose the 2 weeks you get paid properly in Europe or keep going back to America to not get paid. Or, I mean, you know what I mean? So, and many European bands are the same. And so there's no model of tour support. There's no model of, I mean, you could keep touring and get a bit bigger, but it doesn't have the same, I don't know, what would you say, weight behind it used to in 1986 or 1996 or whatever, because there's no physical.
Yeah, but and again, that's just because, just to circle all the way back, that's because there's all these other entertainment options,
Mm,
right? Like when there's no video games you're competing with or whatever, there's a lot, it's a lot easier to convince someone to come out. And if you are, the pinnacle of the entertainment industry as such,
yeah.
then obviously you're going to have more money to get, to focus on making sure that you can continue to have these products that get more people to come out,
Mm.
you know. But I agree that it's like, but I just think that's like the market forces, and I think we're just kind of fucked. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Well,
I think that,
we were certainly shown how fucked we were during lockdown when I mean everything was just shut. All the, obviously everybody knows.
yeah, exactly. You're either a t-shirt designer or you're completely screwed.
Well, I mean, I think yeah, a friend of mine, she just told me that her old design graphic art company just laid off 45 people. The
Well, yeah,
incoming,
because all those places overhired during COVID.
well, oh no, what I mean is the expectation of all their jobs being taken by AI is what's incoming. Um,
Oh,
as,
I mean,
as in, what's the point?
yeah, but like, you know, oh well.
Oh well, everything. On the
Yeah, like I just think with that, like ultimately, yeah, I think that's the sort of thing that like you kind of can't stress too much about just because of how it's going to the way I view AI in general is how it's going to play out is so far beyond me that I'm just sort of like, okay, we'll just ride this one out and just kind of understand that like
Hmm. I mean, that might be true, or it might really not be true, and there isn't a way to write it out. I don't know. I think that it's
but so here's my point with like here's my viewpoint with AI and music, for example, right?
hmm,
Is like because like there are AI songs that have millions of streams right now,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Except the way I view it is I don't see. So let's say you're a metal band
Hmm,
who gets the perfect AI death metal song written,
hmm,
and everyone agrees that this song is great.
hmm.
Okay, like ultimately, you still have to go out and first you have to like the way it works, you can't really say like write me a death metal song and have it be good. You have to like sculpt it a little bit,
Well,
even if that's just saying write me a death metal song inspired by blood incantation and 200 stab wounds and a squeal of grinds.
well,
Right?
I think that is incoming. I mean, I follow a YouTube
Sure,
channel.
sure.
Follow a YouTube channel which is just AI generating music. And I think I sense it's just posting it itself, and it tries to do gent, which is very close to
Yeah.
what that is. The death metal song is a mess because it's trying to figure it out yet. It's
No,
just
but
I think
sure.
that the thing about it is it's not really. I don't think it's not for our particular generation that's going to be occupied by this. I think that if you're 8 now, when you're 15, are you going to care that the music you like is made by avatars or made by AI? And
But
I think pop music. I mean, this is such a I mean, theoretically, a Billie Eilish fan could write a Billie Eilish song better than the Billie Eilish song that's actually been written by her coming out the day after. I mean, music is childish and
yeah.
electronically enough for it to be easily copied. I think
But I also think that the artist, there's still like the way I view it is like there's tons of people out there playing music who had their songs written for them by a super producer
Right. Well, I mean,
and who are putting their own, whatever emotions into the live performance, and then they're taking it from there, and there's a lot of metal bands who, increasingly metal bands have their songs written by some super producer, a Jay Rust and a Mark Lewis type, really good, really talented guys who create excellent music, you know,
right. Well,
and then they go out.
I'm not even talking about people saying to AI to write me a death metal song for my band that's real. I'm talking about unreal bands that kids like because they've grown
Yeah,
up
but
on,
that's
you know.
I think that's existed for years though, right? Like look at Hatsumi Miku in Japan. Like that's what it is a super producer creates songs that this like anime hologram girl performs and
Okay, sure,
like
but I think it's different because potentially you're talking about removing any human from the process, and it's because it's a
yeah.
self-learning capacity. Um, I think it's probably not. If you like, I'm not sure how AI is going to cope with trying to make a sloppy black thrash band, as long as there's people still around who want to listen to that. But I think things like Neil's from minimalist composers, gaming soundtrack music, a lot of pop music. This is the writing's on the wall for all that shit, because as soon as there are, people who get earn tons of money from gaming incidental music, as soon as people find a way of not paying anybody to do that, they're not going to do it.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Clint Mansell's, or let's say the mini Clint Mansell's, this world. Your time is up, I think, soon, because they're just the work is going to dry up because computers will be able to just. I mean, this minimalistic stuff, which has millions of fucking people following it as well. I see. I think that's somehow going to go first, and also pop music because it's the very nature of what it is. It's going to be harder to replicate a punk band through AI, and there's no doubt about it. But I mean, I don't know, but is that a growing concern for your average 14-year-old? Probably not.
Yeah, but I also think that your average 14-year-old is still excited to, they go to see a band. They don't ask who wrote that song. They're excited to.
I don't think 14-year-olds are excited to see bands. I don't think I guarantee you right now in Dublin City on Tuesday, there isn't a band with guitars playing to a room full of excited teenagers. There isn't. They don't care about this kind of thing. Maybe there,
I
maybe there's,
I don't know if
maybe
I don't
there's,
know if I agree.
uh, I would doubt it because I mean,
Like
especially not guitar
I,
music.
I'm talking about like the crowds who I'm seeing at these Escuela Grind 200 Saboon shows. Like there are really young kids showing up, and I'm like, is this okay?
Yeah, but I mean, well, I'm talking about. I mean, there isn't any guitar music in mainstream music in the top 100.
Oh, sure. And on that
I mean,
level, yeah. But I think
you're
there's
talking about 100, 200 17-year-olds. I mean, I'm sure maybe there's, if you went to see Power Trip, if there were or the equivalent now a couple of years later in Dublin on a Wednesday, then yeah, there's probably going to be 250 people, and some of them are going to be between 16 and 24, sure. But I'm kind of talking about at least mainstream music. I don't think there's
sure.
anywhere where 800 who aren't niche, the couple of niche teenagers who have survived the cull left are going to see a band with guitars. They're going to see an Instagram influencer.
I mean, but I
I
disagree. Like Harry Styles, who plays guitar music, it's not good guitar music, but it is guitar music.
would disagree with guitar music, really.
That's fair. I could accept that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like you still see pop songs. Look at fucking what's her face, the Disney girl who's just ripped off the Olivia Rodrigo, right? Like her big single last year was like a Paramore ripoff. Like, okay, is that like, it's not like rock or metal, but it was still objectively a rock song. Good for You is rock music, even if it's not necessarily for me.
Well, I mean,
You
okay,
know,
there's no rock music that isn't emasculated then in the top couple of hundred things that is really
I
stuck.
mean,
And what I'm trying to say is I don't think in most big cities there is 1,000 or 800 teenagers who are like, fucking hell, such and such is playing. We got to go and fucking see it like it
no,
was.
but I get what you're saying.
I
Yes,
do.
yes.
And on those terms, because of the kind of total victory of pop music, I don't think it matters to that industry that the future of it will be made by AI or whatever. So that I kind of feel that whatever we represent or whatever we're into has to be a sort of like a slow food rebellion to the McDonald's. There has to be 10, 15 or 20% of people who go, we don't want this, or we want to go and see a live band. And as long as that exists, we can exist. But if not, it's a bit harder. I mean, we as in, I mean, it's complicated because a part of me is just like, who cares if it gives a shit if metal isn't in the mainstream or whatever. I guess it's more the analog process of someone on a stage playing something to people who've come to see it. And it feels like
Yes.
much of the forces that have been inactive, or many of the forces socially, technologically, um, medically in the last couple of years have been forcing people into perhaps some kind of a future where that becomes less and less of a reality. That's my sort of dark view of where it's headed. But that's hardly surprising.
Yeah. But again, I think part of that is tied into the video gamification of everything, right? Which is like probably broadly speaking a bad thing for society,
Yeah.
but but it's also, I just think like when you look at how stadium bands putting on compelling shows for young people,
But
you know,
what bands is that? I just don't think anybody's interested. There isn't a band who are young enough to appeal to young people who are doing that kind of thing, because I think rock is just so
what about Turnstile?
I don't know. It's such a it's such an
Turnstile, I think, just did 5,000 tickets in
oh,
Brooklyn the other day.
Turnstile. Okay, I've heard the name. Yeah.
Like those are kids who I like grew up with and knew, right? And then after the show, you go to the bar and people are singing along to those songs, right? And I think that's another example of just like young people want this. And when you're able to, like, Turnstile is very good at turning their shows into like a communal event. And I remember that in 2014, it was like a communal event and people are singing along, and and I think that you can't really replace that, but I also think you need to emphasize that. And if you look at like their content, if you look at the content that successful hardcore bands are using on TikTok, right, which is really the extreme music that does best on TikTok right now, although that's starting to change. Weirdly, Bethlehem get a lot of love on TikTok. I don't know.
Bethlehem.
Um, I think it's because Oleanar is like a really interesting person. Like they don't have a TikTok, but people create a lot of Bethlehem content.
Oh, do you mean the girl from Dark and Nocturnal Slaughter Cult?
Yeah,
Okay, well
but
that's
nobody
probably
talks about Dark and Nocturnal Slaughter Cult on TikTok, but a lot of people talk about Bethlehem.
yeah, but that's because I mean her image is a kind of living meme, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
Her,
it's easy to engage with. Yeah.
oh, hang on, just 1 second.
Will you send me the next? Hey,
I was just thinking about what you're saying there. I think we're talking at cross purposes, because I suppose what I'm more interested in is that, or what I'm thinking about is, I suppose, the broader societal impacts of what AI how it
sure.
might change creativity. I'm not particularly talking about specific bands and how they're engaging with some young people. I suppose that's the difference. Maybe it's so we're kind of
But
talking across each other. But I take your point. I guess I've just been, because I've been thinking about this a lot, about whether it's the chat GPT or whatever it's the chat bot program. I've been messing around on Mid-Journey. I've been, with the art thing, just looking at it, and the music thing is more of an uncanny valley. There's no two ways about it. But
sure.
I think I suppose what I've been thinking about is the concept that in a couple of years' time, let's say the next Primordial gig, we all fucking die in a car crash or in a fucking plane crash. And in 6 years' time, 4 years' time, some Primordial fan goes, well, I want an album that's between the third and the fourth album with this producer, these guitars, here's the topics, here's the art. Go to sleep, wake up in the morning, new Primordial album. I'm kind of thinking to myself, how close could it possibly be or get to where we were in that period? And I think if I understand the potentialities of AI, then that's a very real consideration, that we
Sure.
have 100 new Led Zeppelin albums in 10 years' time, all tailored to everybody's individual particular needs and wants. And I think that the potential for it to just sort of remake the entire landscape. I was talking to my aunt about, we're talking to my aunt about it. She's a tutor in college, and I said, well, what about when students are not going to have to write their own theses? How are you going to be able to tell which one is which? And her brain was like, what? And I had to explain about the chat and where it's going to go, and like how
Sure.
to face that. So that's where my brain is at. I'm not your example of Turnstile, who I've come across actually on YouTube. is valid, of course. That's I just think I was thinking about something completely different, you know.
No, yeah, and I think that like it's in terms of a broader impact, I view it the way like Google kind of fundamentally changed how our brains work,
Mm.
right? Like the ability to Google something suddenly means that you don't really need to like know things anymore. You need to
Yeah.
be able to like synthesize information, and you need to be able to yada yada yada. But like in terms of like knowing things, you don't
Mm.
really need that. We're kind of past that. And I feel like and so look at it this way, right? Is for a long time we viewed the ability to know a lot of things as a key piece of intelligence,
Yeah.
right? And that shifted. Now we view the ability to synthesize a bunch of information as a key, and then come up with a cool solution is a key piece of intelligence, right?
But isn't that well? Okay, give me an example of what you mean.
So what I'm saying is like if pre-Google,
Yeah.
I knew every Winston Churchill fact.
Okay. Yeah. I'd have to take your word for it if we were in the pub. Yeah.
Not, but also like you would. That was a lot more impressive because it meant that like that guy who knew every Winston Churchill fact had to like read a
Study.
bunch of books
Yeah.
and da 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 and had to like know about Winston Churchill.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Now you're just like, oh, that guy got bored on Google last night and wanted to impress this girl whose grandpa died in the war.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
It's a
like,
stretch,
like,
but I'll accept it. Yeah.
no, but like, you get what I'm saying, right? Like
Yeah.
you know, like there's no point. But now you're like, oh, the really smart people are like the people who like figure out, who are able to take all the data and then be like, oh, here's my marketing plan for the new Primordial record.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And then do that. And I think that right now, or like a journalist who can write a really compelling article is a lot more impressive than someone who can spew off a lot of facts about metal history.
Do you think so? My view of most journalism is pretty low these days.
I mean, that's fair. I'm talking about like
If we can agree on like Matt Taibbi or something, I'll go.
yeah, one of the cool guys, like writing like a really interesting thing that's objectively more interesting than the really annoying Punisher who's like, well, so I have this question about the 1997 Primordial tour, and and like, so like we've kind of accepted that, and I think that like, I don't know, I just think that this is the next step is like, how do you use these tools? I've made a ton of money essentially Googling things for other people. And if you ask any IT guy, at a relatively low level, most of the time those guys will just tell you, like, I'm not really that smart. Like everyone thinks I'm smart because I'm a computer guy. I just Google stuff all day.
Well, I think it sort of speaks for itself. The fact that I mean, at least anecdotally, every one of my young relatives that I would speak to, I mean, between the ages of whatever 7 and 14, seem to have no interest in entering. Well, that's unfair for me to say. Let's say this: the aspirations of an awful lot of young kids to be YouTubers instead of or to know platforms or work platforms because they see that as a route to some sort of a living which shouldn't really be occupying your brain when you're 10 years old over education or academia.
Yeah, but when you were 10 years old, you wanted to be a rock star.
I wanted to be a footballer actually, but no, maybe that's
same shit.
Maybe that's a bad example. I'm what I'm trying to say is that maybe I'm trying to sort of shoehorn that into what you've just said, at least from what my experience. Is it that people are, viewing those who can work best with the tech more than people who would have known things traditionally. But I suppose it depends on where you work or what you're doing, though. I suppose.
Sure, but I just think it's the same thing where it's like the people who are able to kind of deploy technology effectively tend to be the people we view as the smartest people. And that's historically. And I just think I don't fully know how that's going to look yet, but I see it happening. And I do see smart people.
You mean China?
No, but even like I know a podcaster who uses AI to help structure his podcasts, where essentially what he does is he sits down and he says, okay,
Well, he'd probably use AI to write them by now, I suppose. Yeah.
well, yeah, well, basically what it does for him is he types into the pod, like he does a music industry podcast, right? So his idea might be, I want this episode to be about how to book your first live shows.
Yeah, and then
So
the chat
GPT just spits out an outline with bullet points, and then he does some edits and then like shares his stories from his personal experience or whatever.
Mm.
And then that's his podcast outline, and then he does it with his friend.
I suppose if he can figure out voice synthesis, he probably doesn't need to do it at all eventually.
Yeah, but that's
the things that I think about.
No, I agree, but that's I think where personal experience becomes really important, right? Because I think that
but not to the people who, like, for example, you can always sort of synthesize somebody else's personal experience if you're speaking to people who are unfamiliar with it, I suppose. I don't know. It's interesting because we're at some sort of pivotal societal crossroads where
Sure.
exactly is this going to go in? It's not just the far, we're not talking about 10, 15, 20 years. We're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. What's going to happen? I mean, like already like I said, the chat GT, what is it? GP or GT? Which is it? GPT. Okay. Both. Already just that model, and theoretically, me and you could agree on, okay, we're going to form an online newspaper and never actually write anything for it. We just inform it of our politics and go, we want a left-leaning newspaper that supports these 6 things. Now scour the internet, write the stories, off you go. I mean, that's
not crazy. Yeah.
It's not
It's
crazy.
already happening probably.
Yeah, already happening probably. Yeah. Whereas politicians who are just bots are allowing this to write their tweets for them to order based on what their history was or their politics are. So that's it kind of breaks my brain thinking about it. I'm sort of glad to have had 30 odd years of my career behind me on some level, but like because this kind of stuff, and especially how it's going to seep into the music industry. I mean, maybe it won't. Maybe in 5 years' time, we'll be sitting around at VAC and I'll be going, fucking hell, I didn't think I was going to be doing this when I was 55 or whatever. And it's just going to still roll on doing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always evolving, but I also think that like a couple years ago, and this is pre-COVID times, right? Festivals started to really lean into we're going to have a live stream portion.
Yeah.
Or we're going to have a VR portion. And now they've started to pick it up again. But what I consistently see is like people aren't interested.
No, but there was no there was no way to make any money out of it.
Like a few people are interested. Sometimes you can do it in a compelling way if you have all the stars aligning and the right type of fan base.
It has to be the right type of fan base. And that comes back to what I was saying before. That's very few sort of metal bands have that, I think,
And so what I'm trying to say is, so people don't want that.
No.
And so, which is fine, probably better, but like my point is, I think that the live thing is always going to have value because I think that people will always be like, I'm not going to, I don't, because the reason people value live music is not just because they want to go see Alan Averill running around on stage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They like it because they want to see their friends. They want to, they want to drink a beer. It's part of an overarching experience, and it's better at least in that moment, than the sitting at home playing video games with your cat.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it also depends on where societally we're going with these things as well. I mean, I'm not, is there any point in talking about all that kind of stuff? I don't know, because people have heard me talk about it in the podcast before, personal carbon footprint emission stuff and all this kind of stuff. Of all that stuff, which I'm unsure of, because the weight of bureaucracy and how much of it is just, sort of empty theory. And how much ends up becoming a reality as we move into some sort of, the sort of climate emergency, stratosphere, whatever you want to call it, societal way.
Sure.
It could end an awful lot of the things we're talking about. But
well, that's the other piece.
But on the
that's
other
the
hand,
other piece that nobody wants to think about. That's scarier than AI.
Well, that's what I think about all the time. No, it's just, I mean, that's why the podcast called Agitators Anonymous. It's not called It's Asher, It'll Be Grand, And,
Yeah.
the whole point is it's not to be apocalyptic about it, because of obviously all of these fucking nonsense ideas generally they collapse under the weight of their own bureaucracy, like every authoritarian impulse from most systems did, but it sometimes took decades or whatever. But so I kind of think of it, try and think about some of these things in those terms. But I think you are right in that when the lockdown interestingly showed us that people weren't interested in live streams, but then again, you could watch probably a better one on YouTube anyway. So people were like, well, why would I watch this, But a great percentage of people afterwards never came back to shows. I think a lot of people went, I don't think I'm into this, actually, Or
well, yeah, and
they just go to viral.
There was an article that someone wrote, and this was pre-pandemic, but it was actually kind of eye-opening. This guy, Chris Kevorkian, I believe his name is, he wrote an article that was basically like, I feel this weird obligation to go to shows, and I'm 40, and I have like a desk job, and I hate my life because I go to shows 4 times a week, but I feel this obligation to go.
Yeah.
And when he wrote that article, tons of people in the scene were like, oh my God, this is me.
Yeah.
Like,
it's been me sometimes as well,
Absolutely. And I think that's fine. It's just, it's not as obvious as I think we like to make it out to be. You know what I mean? I think that like there is sort of this sense of being overwhelmed by having to go to so many shows. And the whole thing.
It's complicated because you do feel a sense of obligation, because that's part of a scene that maybe you've actively built. But at the same time, when it's cold and raining outside, and on a Tuesday you're going to go down and see Armored Saint, and you're going to have the same 90-second conversation with 20 different people. How you doing? How you doing? Yeah, okay, things okay. Blah blah blah. And your brain just goes, just shut down. Yeah. But then what do you end up spending your time doing? Sitting looking at the screen instead, or whatever. It's yeah, I do understand it, the idea that freeing yourself from obligation sometimes is a good thing, but then it ties back into what we were talking about 20 minutes, half an hour ago, which is the sort of opt-out culture of in relation to social commitments, which fundamentally can be a bad thing overall. Like, I know many people who are like, oh, yeah, I get to work from home, blah blah blah. I go, really? But you do realize that you being able to pad around in your pajamas all day is going to kill, well, let's say this. People I knew who were overjoyed at working from home, and I said to them, there are things you're going to miss, mark my words. And then they realized, oh, there's no dates. I never get laid. I don't have a drink after work. I don't go to a gig. Nothing spontaneous happens. I go, no, I know, because you're sitting in your front room in your fucking pajamas on your laptop all day. And then you go, well, okay, we'll eat something and go to bed. And you're not supposed to live like that. Even as attractive as to some people it seemed for a while. To some people, they still fell into that. But what the fuck am I talking about? I don't know.
No, but I understand what you're saying. And
pajama
this is
party.
Like, no, but like this is part of like the fundamental whatever. I think that within a society, musicians are a really good example.
Mm.
Within a society, there are certain lifestyles you see that you think are desirable, but which are only beneficial for a small portion of people with a very specific mindset, right? To use the musician example, a lot of people would like to be a touring rock musician.
Sure.
Okay. A lot of people would kill for your level of success.
Mm.
Right. We meet these people. They put tons of money into it and they've gotten nowhere.
Sure.
Okay. But simultaneously, what you consistently find is that you give someone that shot and they freak out and they can't take the pressure.
Well, I mean,
You know what I mean? And this is something I've experienced time and time again, right? Like, so and I think it's the same with like working from home or whatever, right? Like, I think that definitely works for a certain chunk of the society. I've never had an office job in my life,
yeah.
but I also think that,
I mean, what it was, yeah, I mean,
I don't know if that was good for me.
yeah, I mean, I think that what I meant was I wasn't really even talking about playing in a band or being anything of those aspirations. What I was talking about was people who actually just worked office jobs. And I mean,
I get it.
I haven't had an office job for I don't know, 16 years, 17 years. But what did make it bearable was that I worked with good people, and on a Thursday you might have a spontaneous night out on on the piss, and who knows, unforeseen things might have happened, and you might have had fucking fun and blah whatever, and there'd be the usual office shit that went on, and that's what made it bearable. And if you remove all of that, I think an awful lot of people rushed into the convenience and forgot. They're like, oh shit, 3 years ago I haven't had a date in 3 years, or I haven't met anyone. I go, well, that's because you removed joyfully the thing where you had your most social interaction, and
where you went outside.
yeah, the repercussions for that. I wasn't even talking about people who wanted to be rock stars or whatever, just the people who, I suppose, didn't really think about the repercussions a year or two later, or who are now coming back into my city going, where would you go and see a band? And I go, nowhere. Because when you were joyfully embracing working from home, and there are certain places in the city that can only exist on the after work patronage of people spontaneously, but you chose to embrace the convenience of the opposite, which I get. But fundamentally, if 100,000 people do that, who you are used to be milling around the city center, you can't have a record shop anymore. You can't have nice things or unusual things because you're in the burbs and you're never in the city. And people go, oh yeah. And I thought about this within an hour or like the first day of this shit happening, like, oh shit, what happens to art, creativity? Like, people need to be inconvenienced in order for it to populate creative social hubs. Because if everybody's just in their own convenient little bubble, the atoms never fucking meet or whatever. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I agree. And that's sort of, again, this is why, and like, this is sort of the problem, right? Is like with society in general, right? Is that like, as you continue to dismantle, and this is part of why I believe so strongly in live music, right? This is my arch thesis of everything. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm in.
Okay,
give it to me. I have my United Nations coffee mug here.
There we go. We'll sing L'International after. Basically, the problem with our society is that we continue to devalue community in all facets.
Yeah,
this means offices. This means churches, for better or for worse, right?
Yeah,
this means families, right? In terms of, and not in terms of like divorce or whatever, although that's a piece, but I mean also in terms of like, more than ever, if you went to college and became a liberal and your family vote for Trump, you just have the option to just no longer talk to your family, and everyone is like, that's fine. You know what I mean? Whereas like, I personally believe it's really good that my mechanic cousin, who's a Trump guy, talks once a year with my European dad, who votes that. Like, I think that's good for both people.
Of course. I completely agree.
And what consistently happens is that we've eroded those systems. And and we need those systems to not want to avoid political polarization. We need those systems to like remember that the guy on the other side is a person.
Of course.
Right. And if we forget that the guy on the other side is a person, then what the fuck are we doing? Why do you know what I mean? And so we've sort of done that, and now we're dealing with the consequences of depersonifying everyone around us.
Yeah, I mean,
and just living inside these, you know what I mean, self-contained whatever.
It's because we're invited to think of things in only binary terms, which are either good or evil, and that the middle ground of these things, where most people meet traditionally through consensus or through disagreement, and they reach some of them. Most people are nuanced and they're in the middle with these things, but we're taught repeatedly that whoever agrees with you is evil, or a fascist or a communist or whatever else, or whatever it's going on, and that nobody is like, well, it's a product of 10 years of social media derangement, but also the idea that the old media model is so completely dead that I often say on the podcast, moderate woman says reasonable thing. Nobody fucking reads that article, even though that might be the best thing you read all day, because that's where most people should reach consensus and sit, but because everything is always about the most extreme outliers of every position, and that we're encouraged to believe that the opposite of who we think or who we've been told we are is always the most extreme position. But that doesn't, you can have concerns about migration and have voted for gay marriage, which is, it's quite common, but we're constantly told that that's not possible. And that's, I think, I don't know if I'm putting more, that's how I look at it. I agree with you completely in that we're just pushed into these binary choices. And that's because I think it's easier for them. It's easier for the, whatever you want to call it, the, technocratic elite to get on with what they're doing if everybody is tearing strips off each other, because that's classic divide and conquer.
And to me, this is the beauty of live music and embracing diverse and interesting lineups. Like, I know that when Escuela Grind went on tour with Exhumed, right? Escuela Grind, who have, 3 LGBT people in the band, who probably, of any of the emerging grind bands, probably have the biggest like sort of LGBT following, specifically trans following, because of Chrissy, the guitarist. And I know that was the most trans people that most of those old school Exhumed fans had seen in a room at one time. And that was really good for everyone involved, right? To be able to like cross borders in a way that like wasn't really happening. You know what I mean? And I think the more you do that, the more you're able to, like live music is able to bring a bunch of different people together in a way that I feel like many other things have been. And live music is also guilty of this to a large extent, obviously. But I think that it's important to have these communal things that are sort of divorced from, that have the same effect as church, right? Where it's like it's divorced from your political whatever. You go because, you fucking listen to Iron Maiden. And it doesn't matter what you think. You know what I mean?
I'm trying to apply the logic of what we're talking about to live music. I see what you mean. That's not what I was talking about at all, but I see your point.
Oh no, I'm just talking about like places for communities to come together.
I think that that's a sort of practical example in relation to the the kind of music that we're involved in. I suppose what I would consider is that the primary place where this has to happen is within people's own mindset, so to speak, is that if they see the world through this sort of very binary choices, the algorithm plays them or forces them into these corners. And so, but yeah, there are two different things again, but I can see what you mean. Yeah.
I just think that I think that the only way you're able to fight back against someone being lost in a completely different feed and having a completely different set of information from you, which is something that you and I have confronted sometimes in our friendship.
Yeah, sure.
Right. I think the only way to really confront that is through conversation. And it's really hard to get someone to reach out to someone randomly on the internet. It's a lot easier to get them to meet someone at a show and be like, wow, I like Iron Maiden, you like Iron Maiden, let's
Yeah.
talk. And then,
I,
you know what I mean? Like, it's a
I think,
lot less scary to do that than to be like, I'm going to find a conservative on the internet today and talk to them about abortion.
well, I suppose if we're going to talk about live music, then we have to follow on from what you're saying is then people who see themselves as coming from open-minded communities need to let go of this instinct towards cancel culture for the things they view as the binary choice that I'm talking about. I think that's a very big problem in metal. You know, the supposed
Yeah.
the people who supposedly champion diversity don't want diversity of opinion or whatever you want to say, and so there's many contradictions within that statement, and that people who would, uh, I mean, support what you just said, and I think that that's fair enough. Would then point out the contradictions that some of the same kind of people are the same kind of people who would, support canceling X and Y
Yeah.
bands.
That's a separate conversation for another time because we can get into like my very hot takes there. Um, which are I think you would appreciate them. We'll talk about that next time I see you.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, fundamentally, it's what I say to people who, I mean, it's again, it's this sort of modern inculcation to believe that it's your job to save the world, and that fundamentally, I think too many people have been inculcated in the idea that, for example, freedom of speech is just a dog whistle or it doesn't matter, when it's really one of the grounding, structures of our civilization. And once it's gone, it's gone. And that um, the people who think of themselves as doing good are, in my opinion, often useful idiots for a cause they don't really understand. And the idea also that canceling or who you choose to cancel stops with you, and you were the last person to choose, is just such a naive reading of the
Well,
situation. It's I think I'm a sort of free speech absolutist, which I understand has its problems, and there are many, but the alternative is much, much grimmer and darker. And I think that not enough people consider that when they're, but activism is an opiate. And seeing as most people don't have hobbies anymore, I get it.
well, and that's sort of right. That this is ultimately where political polarization comes on both sides, right? Is that it's
It,
a
it
set, politics are now religion,
yeah, sure.
and that leads to a lot of issues,
But we do have to acknowledge,
and
but we do have to acknowledge that it's mainly one side of the debate that is reaching for the cancel culture card. I mean, I understand that people say that to qualify a statement as going, well, it's both sides, and I go, it is, but I don't see conservatives out trying to cancel shows or whatever else,
yeah,
So
because they're doing other separate horrible dumb things.
I mean,
Like so everyone's just like trying to oppress everyone else because it's just religion. That's all it is.
yeah, but sure, if
And
we're going to go back to what you were just talking about, which was the live show thing, I mean, you're going back to your micro example of a sort of macro discussion. I
sure.
mean, there's only one side really in the in that game, at least as I can see. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you again.
I mean, I don't know about that.
Really?
Uh yeah, I mean, I think that like if you're using
Do you think black metalers are out there canceling punk rock shows? I don't think so.
um no, I was gonna stay in the culture field. I didn't have a music
Ah,
example to mind. Although
okay. I was
I
trying
could
to.
come up with a music example if you gave me a second. Um,
No, go, but
like there's
go with your other cultural example. No, I mean,
okay.
I'm just curious
I
because
was going to use the example of like conservatives taking out books. Like in Florida right now, a bunch of like classic children's books are being taken out of the schools, right? Because they have woke ideology. That's something happening right now that conservatives are doing that are against cancel culture. Is they're taking out, and I'm not talking about
what books traditionally have woke idea?
one second. There was one I just read this morning, but like Petit
No,
Prince, Little Prince, sorry. That was taken out, like a boxcar children book, which is like a children's mystery series. Um that I used to like. Um,
what's that from the 70s,
they took out
60s?
yeah, they took out The Giver, which When you're banning The Giver, you really got to take a look at yourself.
See, I don't know that example. I thought
Oh, The
it's
Giver.
I'd
It's
have to
it's
go.
like a book about living in an authoritarian state. It's like 1984, but like you can give it to 8-year-olds and they don't get scared, but they still like get the big takeaway.
Really?
Um,
I'd have to. I mean, I don't know the example, so I'd have to look at
I,
what.
I mean, I don't know if that was like the best. What I'm saying is it's like my my first anti-authoritarian book, whatever. Um, the point being like they're like conservatives are taking these books out of schools, and I would argue that's dramatically worse than canceling a Horna show in Denver. You know, regardless of whether of how bad Horna may or may not be.
Well, I mean, well,
I
we.
don't think you should be.
Well, I
I
think
think people should just have that freedom to choose.
I
But
think
whatever. I'm just pointing
I
this
mean,
out.
you could give that example, but I mean, I think if we really dig down into it, you could think of many, many more examples from the other side, from canceling authors or speakers at colleges and all that kind of stuff. I think the scales are tipped in a certain direction because I think um, the cultural zeitgeist at the moment is, I suppose, in things like academia or colleges or whatever, is tipping one particular way. And it's the same with shows. It's the same with this. I mean, I take your Florida example. I'm not sure if that's, if we look at, some of the things that are taught in schools, I'm not sure that that's. It's an example, but I'm not sure it's an example of parity across the entire thing that we're talking about.
No, but I think you see
We're
it.
getting in the weeds now.
Yeah, we are getting in the weeds, and we have 5 minutes left, and I have to take a record label out to lunch in a minute here.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, no, I mean,
you know,
I mean, ultimately, I think the idea is that I think that everybody should, it's being, we're being invited to think of the other side of every debate as like evil, good or evil, and this binary choice, the simplistic choice, and things are not that simplistic, and they're just, people are nuanced and complicated, and they can have ideas from different reaches. And I think that just this culture war stuff is just obfuscation. It's just divide and conquer
yeah.
thrown at us by people of this unnamed elite, or whatever you want to call it. That's what I generally tend to look at it. I have some ideas.
Well, it's just about divisiveness, right? And the more that you can get divisiveness, the right, because it's like that fundamental sense of rejection that you can force between two parties. You know what I mean?
It's just divide and conquer. Yeah, classic divide and conquer.
And that's I don't know, whatever. I just, more people need to fucking go home and listen to black metal records.
I'll go and see a Horner show in Denmark. Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Go to the Horner show, march in the gay pride parade, what, do it all.
Yeah.
Learn from everything. I don't know. I think that the more you let your eyes get open, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, and I just think that it's just good to try and get out of the ideological bubble, because I kind of think about things sometimes as on a scale of, I don't know if I've got 3 minutes left to try and explain this. 1 to 9, 1 being let's say 1 is far left, 9 is far right. Most people are 4, 5, 6. But if the 1, 2, 3s, if the 1, 2, 3s get to call the 4, 5, 6s, the 7, 8, 9s, they destroy the 4, 5, 6. So ultimately, the middle ground is consensus. It's nuance. It's context, and those are the things people aren't interested in because they don't drive clicks or traffic or whatever. So everybody assumes always, as I said, the worst of everyone else's intentions, and that's just not how life is. Most people are not like that,
Hopefully.
Well, we'll see. We'll have to find out when the fucking AI gets a hold of us and just goes, I think we could just delete all of you.
There we go. There we go.